From the News Channel 5 Network, this is Morning Line with Nick Barris.
Joining us on Morning Line, Nick Barris here with you on a Wednesday. Good show on tap for you. This is one I think either you enjoy sitting back listening and learning, because I do every time this guest comes on, or you can join in the conversation. We'll have the number up there in a moment. As you see, we're going to be talking about malpractice law and whether or not you've had a event maybe at a hospital or involving a doctor these days that you think maybe was malpractice, maybe not. Go with your gut intuition, make the call, and that's why you bounce it off an attorney like Clint Kelly. Good morning to you, sir. It's good to see you. How are you?
Good to see you too. Yeah.
Boy, this is a busy time of year in hospitals. I wanted to go right this to you first. I'm telling you, my sister-in-law had an issue, and she had to go to the hospital this past couple of days, and it's so crowded in there right now, and they are so busy and overwhelmed right now with COVID and RSV and flu that she sat for probably 8 hours in the lobby.
Yeah.
Waiting to be seen. Now, that's not necessarily malpractice. It's not their fault. These doctors are overwhelmed.
But
what's going on?
Well, we need more doctors and we need more hospitals. And I don't understand how this city is growing leaps and bounds, bursting at the seams. Do you see any new hospitals under construction?
No, I always thought there were plenty of hospitals in
There used to be. There aren't any more.
We need more. And you know, in fact, in a lot of the rural areas, the hospitals shut down.
Exactly. So, yeah. I mean, I've told you for some time now that it's inevitable when we have assembly line medicine, when you start having a population of patients that grows and a population of healthcare providers that remains steady, then that margin for safety shrinks in procedures.
Yep,
and we're going to talk about things that happen now in hospitals that we never heard happened in hospitals before. Maybe because there's more media attention to it, maybe because, as I suspect, these are going to become more common because Nashville simply doesn't have the resources as it used to keep an adequate safety margin to prevent tragic events like what we'll discuss today.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that in a moment. But yeah, what we're saying is there's more patients, especially when you have all this cold and flu going around. And when you have the doctors and nurses, the ones on staff that are so overworked maybe or so busy, is it more likely that mistakes happen?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I guess that's a silly question. Of course that's the case.
Well, there's nothing silly about it because people presume, and rightfully so, when they go to the hospital that there would be adequate resources, adequate staff to make sure that everything is done properly. We assume that as patients and as customers. What we don't know, because they're never going to tell us, is when there's inadequate staffing, inadequate training, or inadequate ability to maintain a reasonable margin of safety. And when that doesn't happen, terrible things can happen in a hospital.
Yeah, and the bottom line on this, and Clint's always telling me, I know sometimes you have no choice but to go to the hospital. Thank goodness they're there for you. But avoid going to the hospital if anything, because you know what? My sister-in-law, and she's going to be okay, but I mean, they thought she might have pneumonia, sat in that lobby surrounded by dozens of other sick people, coughing and sneezing, waiting for hours. So, I mean, even if she wasn't sick when she got there, she's probably going to be sick after leaving.
Well, we know it's filled with bugs, Nick. There's bugs everywhere. And you know, it's just, as you say, when you're around sick people, your odds of contracting an illness go up.
Yeah, well, you report it, but when you go and see it firsthand, it's jarring how crowded it is. Real quick, before we get into some of these cases we're going to discuss that you're handling right now, remind folks again, what it takes to have a malpractice case, and so that set the stage for them.
Yeah, there's two components to every medical malpractice case. We call it healthcare liability. That's what the lawyers call it. But there are two parts of it. The first part is there has to be a major medical mistake, which we call a violation of the standard of care. That's another way of saying that the healthcare provider violated a rule that they have to follow. The second component is what we call major medical injuries. There must be a connection or link between the failure to follow the rule, violating a medical principle, and the injury that the patient suffers. If those two can be connected, meaning that the injury was caused by the medical mistake, then you have potential for a lawsuit.
Gotcha. All right, let's talk about one of these cases that actually made news. Reporter Alexander Cohen reported on this. And there was a lot of reaction to it from our viewers when it aired because it's so disturbing. And I'll let you kind of lay it out, but you are now representing the family in this case. I think it was pretty obvious when the story aired there's going to be some kind of reaction to what happened, and it makes sense. This sounds like a malpractice case. Go ahead and explain what it was.
Sure. To just some background, hospitals have CPR teams. Sometimes they're called Code Red teams, sometimes they're called Med Alert teams, but these are teams composed generally of a physician, respiratory therapist, a few nurses who rush in whenever a patient has code blue. So, you know, we've all seen on TV, code blue, patient having a heart attack or the heart needs defibrillation. This crash team descends on this patient, brings a cart with them. That cart will have oxygen. It will also have what's called a defibrillator. That's the shock thing. You know, that's called a defibrillator. Anyway, these teams are supposed to apply the defibrillator to restore the heart rhythm, to get a heartbeat back, and to get the patient out of, to resuscitate the patient. In this situation, you had a gentleman and his wife who were at a hospital. The gentleman was hospitalized and was in a room and went into cardiac arrest. So there's code blue announced over the system. The crash team comes in there, instantly begins to resuscitate the patient and apply the defibrillator. This patient was on oxygen. He had been on oxygen before the CPR started and needed oxygen during the CPR.
Does that mean there was a mask over his face that he's breathing pure oxygen?
Yes. As far as I know, because right now we don't have the record, so I'm just having to go on what the widow told me. But what we do know is this. Prior to the CPR being initiated, a tremendous amount of oxygen, free-flowing oxygen, got out and around this man's body, which is an absolute no-no. People think, well, why not? We got oxygen all around us. What we have around us is only 20% oxygen. What comes out of these machines and put through a mask to a patient is 100% oxygen, which is highly flammable. That's the stuff, people, that they put in rockets to fire rockets into space. That's the same type of situation where astronauts in Apollo 1 who caught on fire in the capsule because a spark lit and all the free oxygen inside the capsule burned them alive. They call it flash fires. So you cannot allow a patient to be surrounded by total free oxygen when there's a potential for a spark. And sure enough, what happened here is when they applied the defibrillator to introduce the electric shock to his heart, instantly caused a flash fire from head to toe on his back, burned his beard, got down into his windpipe. He survived for about another hour, hour and a half. They were able to get his heart rhythm restored, transferred him to Skyline Medical Center where he died shortly thereafter. Cause of death was being burned to death.
His wife was in the room with him? And
wife witnessed it all. In fact, she's in there in the room watching this happen, yelling, "Put him out, put him out." That's how much he was on fire. You know, and they're all trying to get him.
Caught everyone by surprise. Yeah. Now, was anyone else hurt to your knowledge? Any of the doctors?
Not
anyone
that I'm aware of.
Okay, so everyone's aware that oxygen's flammable.
Yes.
They must have been unaware of the fact that there had to be a leak.
Correct.
Is that what I'm just guessing. I mean, what would have caused him to have seemingly a bubble of oxygen, because he was sitting here breathing it all around him, that it would spark? Yeah, had it been sealed just around his face and they went to do the paddles, he would have been fine.
Correct. Correct. And I mean, there's a certain amount of oxygen that can get out anyway. It's not like you can't have some oxygen around the body, some that comes out of the tube. But the amount of oxygen that's necessary, how rich it needs to be to cause a flash fire from head to toe, is an incredible amount of oxygen that should never be like that around the body. We don't know as yet whether or not or how the oxygen got out. All we know is there was so much oxygen that was free around his body, there had to be some defect in the equipment, or there had to be some mismanagement in the way the man was connected to the oxygen such that a leak occurred. And certainly no one was monitoring him carefully to ensure that the oxygen was getting from the tank into him versus out into the air around him.
Do we believe it's possible that he was getting the oxygen he needed to breathe through his mask, but there was a leak elsewhere and it was just coming through maybe the tubes or
entirely
pipes?
Possible. Yeah. We just don't know yet because we don't have the medical records. I've been talking to my expert, talked to him over the weekend after I got hired. He has expertise in biomedical engineering, and he posed these different possibilities to me as reasons why this happened. So it's likely either an equipment failure, a failure to maintain the equipment, or when healthcare providers set him up and connected him to the oxygen in the bed, they did it wrong and allowed this oxygen to escape around his body, such that when the CPR team arrived and applied the defibrillator, it was a fire waiting to happen.
And this just to be clear, so we don't terrify people, because standard of care, the bottom line is every single day in hospitals all across the country, there are individuals that go into cardiac arrest where they're given oxygen, where doctors come in and do these paddles, and it goes just fine. So if this was something that was common, okay, this does not happen very often. It's in fact, I've never heard of a case like this.
Nick, there was a lawyer on another network that came out after this interview was done and said that there are 100 or hundreds of fires that occur across the country. That's more common than you think. That's not necessarily true. A fire like what happened to this man is extraordinarily rare. You just don't hear about this. It's almost unheard. It's what we call a never event in the hospital. It's never supposed to happen.
And the reason we would hear of it if it happened more often is because it's going to result in a lawsuit every single time.
It'd be in the news. Well, look what happened.
Look at this
thing went viral. Now, the types of fires that he was talking about, you can have limited fires. You can have a flash fire. Somebody's beard may catch on fire. You may get a fire around the mass, like a whoof, you know, something very quick like that. But a fire from head to toe, back and front, something where they have to put the guy out, that burns him all the way down into his windpipe, never. I mean, that's just extraordinarily rare. So I don't want people to get scared and think, well, this is going to happen all the time. This is a terrible confluence of events here that's extraordinarily rare. But it just goes to show when someone's not following the rules, and someone didn't here, that is a done deal. Someone screwed this up, either in biomedical engineering or with regard to the healthcare staff that was caring for him that set him up to the oxygen, or the person who, the company that was selling the equipment to the hospital. Somebody screwed up here and caused this man's miserable death, and also caused his widow to witness one of the most horrific events you could ever watch.
Okay, so this is instructive for any type of case. You have been retained by the family now, and it's been some time now. What are the steps you've taken? Has the hospital been notified? Talk us through that process.
The statute requires pre-suit notice. You and I've talked about this before. You have to give pre-suit notice to the target defendant, and then there's a 60-day waiting period in which technically the defendant can look at the records and negotiate, which virtually never happens. So 60 days will pass. We've sent pre-suit notice.
That's a letter saying, we're telling you that.
Very specific technical letter that I've sent to TriStar Centennial Medical Center, putting them on notice that we're going to sue them, and we will sue them. And then after 60 days, we file the lawsuit, send discovery, and that will then be TriStar Centennial's opportunity, if they believe that the product manufacturer the tank, manufacturer the defibrillator, manufacturer of the tubing, whatever that they think is defective, they will then have to blame that manufacturer in their answer to my complaint. And then I would sue the manufacturer or the seller of the equipment as a co-defendant. And then we will take depositions to figure out what was the real cause of this, how could it have been prevented or should have been prevented, and then we sort out who has to pay.
We're going to take a break on that note. There's more to it in terms of the response, the family's involvement, how all this plays out. And we'll also take some of your phone calls. That's one big case Clint's involved with. We know he's involved with some other ones, including COVID at one of the nursing homes, the very latest status on that. We've got some calls coming in, 737-7587. Question or comment about maybe a malpractice case along those lines. We'll get to those as well right after this. Stay with us.